I like to give people credit that, that are not heard from in Trocco and what's his name? I think their view was too small. And I understand why. You delimit a book. I'm just talking. I understand the difference. But as soon as I realized, well, these guys I'm not going to be a part of their book, and I understand why. You see, I guess what I'm really doing is looking for an honest man over and over and over. An honest man, you'd be able to tell him, your shit stinks. And he would say, I think that's right. So what? Again, you get a lot of things because you don't give a shit whether you want them or not in some ways. I've seen this happen in my life over and over. It's like if you lust after something a little too hard, often you foul up your own ability to reach out and get that thing. So I'm like Muhammad a little bit. I got to float like a bee, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
Tell me about Eric Siday. Did you have
Eric Siday?
Yeah.
What a gentleman! What a wonderful gentleman. British, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah, Eric Siday. He was one of the people that Bob Moog put me onto when I was doing my dissertation research. And there I was in New York, not knowing anybody, a real bumpkin from the country. And he was so kind to me. Eric, went in, talked, interviewed him, he played all this stuff for me. He had this Martineau there, this Martineau, and he had done the old ABC logo, with the shake on it, which you don't hear now, of course, but I'd heard it. And he'd done that on Martineau. And he'd done the old Maxwell House coffee ad. That one, on using a piece of Moog equipment that Bob had one of for Eric Siday. I referred to Bob, if he erred, possibly it was loving musicians too much, and taking care of them too much from a business standpoint. But that did build the marketplace. Therefore, the comment about Bob made a lot of sales for which he didn't get to take the order. Eric, fine musician, a real gentleman. I believe his wife was named Edith. Wonderful lady. They fed me. They were just salt of the earth. And Eric told me about Raymond Scott, what Bob had told me, and he told me, Raymond is touched with genius, no question. He knew Raymond Scott, and Raymond, I think, was touched with genius. More than touched, 200 ASCAP tunes, and on and on and on. The fabulous musician, popular in his day, did Lucky Strike Hit Parade, both on radio and on television. A fabulous, again, these are to me all fabulous characters. Eric Siday, Wendy Carlos, Oskar Sala, whom I met in Berlin behind the Iron Curtain, and I couldn't speak German, he couldn't speak English. Somehow we still communicated. Fabulous characters in the field of electronic musical instruments and electroacoustic music.
So did you go to see Oskar Sala when you were doing your PhD?
No, I couldn't afford that. I could barely afford a trip to New York. That was about it. And I was getting all this free information from interlibrary loan at Vanderbilt, thanks to Lois Christ and Miss Birdsong, which I never knew Miss Birdsong's first name. I couldn't have done my dissertation without those two women. I couldn't afford it. And the idea that I could get a grant, I tried that in subsequent years, but always I would get, what university, where do you teach? And of course I was in business. I wasn't, I don't, what do you do? And one of them actually told me candidly, we've never dealt with an individual before. And I pretty much said, yeah, I think that's going to be the case. over all the years. So while I was early in recognizing the importance of preserving the history of electronic musical instruments, I wouldn't say I've had that much success personally. I wrote my dissertation. We started the Electronic Arts Foundation. David Van Koevering, Les Trubey, me, 3 people. We collected instruments. I'm a shoestring. And for some reason, we never incorporated to be a nonprofit, and I don't know why. I mean, some of the things happened the way they did. Les died of cancer. David was having financial problems and so forth. I was struggling, to make ends meet as somebody in the music business and so forth. But we had a large collection of instruments that burned at David Van Koevering's home in Cleveland, Tennessee. And we had put on several shows. We did one at NAMM, trade show in Chicago, and we did one at Herb Deutsch's college, Hofstra, outside of New York there, that got some press.
What sort of instruments did you have in the collection?
We had a Telefunken-Trautonium. We had a Hammond Nova chord. We had the first few Moogs that had been done, and as a matter of fact, the first Model D, which is the popular mini Moog that people relate to the mini Moog, there were 3 models, A, B, C, and D, was still in our possession down in Florida, and the roof started caving in on the place where they were being stored, and Doug Trubey, Les's youngest son, called me, and I said, well, I don't know what else to do. David Keene, who had done this huge collection out in California, and eventually it found its way to Canada, in a kind of a strange arabesque. But at any rate, a lot of those instruments are still there, so part of that dream sort of came true. But very difficult when you're way out in front of other people to get money, to convince them. I was invited as a speaker at the Smithsonian. Milton Babbitt was another speaker. There were very prestigious people there. And I felt, fortunate to just be on the lectern. And when I came to my speech, I told them that basically anything that's under 100 years of dust, leave it there. It won't lose much. But what you're losing right now is the living evolution of a new thing that's the big thing of the 20th century, electronic music. And I think I convinced them, but what good did that do? They said, well, we don't have any budget for doing something like that. They actually had the RCA synthesizer in storage for years and years. I'm not sure it ever saw the light of day. They really just didn't truly understand that while Archie Bunker's chair from the TV show might be of interest to a broad public, which they did have, that maybe it would have been nice to at least have had a part from the Telharmonium. And Thaddeus Cahill, that's 1896 instrument in this country. Which brother? I can't remember. Thaddeus Cahill was the progenitor. He was the architect, the designer. And his siblings were in business with him to make this music that would go out to dentists' offices and restaurants over telephone wires of all things. This in 1906, 1907 eventually. Around 1930, I think, one of Cahill's brothers, tried to get anybody to at least just preserve a part of it. And I'm sure he approached the Smithsonian. No. So now we don't have even a tone wheel to marvel at from a 200-ton electrical musical instrument. I think we're simply poorer for that. But when people ask me, well, what are you professionally? Well, I'm a pedagogue, an author, and so forth, and have been a demonstrator and all the whole Moog experience. I said, but I'm really a futurist. A futurist is somebody that realizes in future what's happening right now will be interesting historically. So I don't think of myself as a historian at all. I think of myself as a futurist. And, there's a lot of wild-eyed futurists that are just full of crap. Some people thought we'd all be flying helicopters to work. Well, that was nonsense to begin with. Or that there would be diesel airplanes. You look at the pages of 1930s popular science, popular mechanics, to see all kinds of visions. And the 1939 World's Fair in the United States was absurd in its view of the future, you know. But some futures are easier to see than others. I mean, anybody that didn't understand that electronic music and these instruments were going to become important, it's hard for me to understand that they didn't understand. John Cage understood it, certainly, when he made his manifesto around 1930 about percussion and noise and, you know, that kind of stuff. Sometimes wonder what Cage would have done if he had gotten a wonderful sampler, you know, prepared piano, never mind. I mean, it's hard to imagine, you know, what he would have done with that. But I knew him a little bit too and talked to him, and he told me he was so busy being John Cage, nobody would let him be anything else. Anywhere he went, he had to be John Cage of their recollection. It's like rock bands that go out, they have to play their hits. The public don't want to they don't want to hear the new stuff. They really want to hear, you know, what they made love to, or, you know, some connection there, some extra musical connection. So yeah, history is a difficult idea to wrap your mind around. And for me, futurism is much more powerful than being a historian. I'm not interested in digging up the past, except to show people, look, in future, all the details of this will be of interest to people, and we're losing them. And indeed we have. We've lost many of those details. We have more of a consciousness for history now than at any time in my history. But, you know, I know in spades, you know, how many artifacts. When I talk to Pierre Schaeffer, where's the phonogen? Where's the morphophone from the early music concrete? Oh, I don't know, you know, no telling. When I talk to Gottfried Michael Koenig in Utrecht, Holland, at the Sonologie, where are those loop machines and, you know, the things? Oh, I think they were cannibalized or maybe thrown into the canal. You know, or no, that was Mueller at Cologne Studio that told me, oh, I asked about some of that equipment in the early days, the early 50s, at the Northwest NWDR, Northwest Deutsch Rundfunk, you know.